Thank you so much for tuning in into today's video for this mini course formula to meaningful modifications. So yesterday we discussed and established that you need to really align the modifications with the purpose of the pose in order to assist your students, in order for you to feel more confident in providing them with something of value. And that is the key word here, and the thing that you really want to consider is that the value of what you offer really is what creates the transformative experience for your students. Now, it is not just about the purpose of the pose. That is going to be the primary consideration within this formula for meaningful modifications. Now, the secondary thing that we want to look at, or we could even take this thing that I'm going to share with you now and we can put it ahead of what we discussed yesterday. It really just depends on the situation. It depends on what sort of opportunity is available for you to speak with and discuss and collaborate with your student. But we need to be able to consider what it is that the student wants. What component of a pose are they wanting to focus on? Now let's just take child's pose as an example. You could give a modification for child's pose for your student that is primarily centered around helping them totally relax. Now generally that is what child's pose is for. Generally we're using child's pose primarily as a relaxation pose, a resting pose, a pose to just soften, and kind of an in-between thing a lot of times. So that would be going back to what we looked at in yesterday's video, which is the purpose. How can I help my student modify child's pose that is still in alignment with the purpose of the pose? And I had a really interesting situation with a student where we were doing a private lesson, and she said, "I hate child's pose. It is so uncomfortable for me." And I said, "Okay, well, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, well, this is how I've been told to modify it." And so she showed me what she was doing, and she said, "It's still very uncomfortable." And I said, "Okay, well, why are you trying to push your bum to your heels?" And she said, "Well, that's kind of what I was told. I was just told to, to not force my bum down to my heels, but that it wasn't okay for me to lift my bum up, but I don't feel relaxed. I feel like I have to hold myself here. I feel like I have to really work hard, and it's not relaxing for me." So I said, "Well, just lift your bum in the air." And all of a sudden she was like, oh my God, that feels so much more relaxing for me. So had her intention of child's pose been, I want to get my bum to my heels, then that would have looked differently in terms of the modification that I offered her. But her intention was, I just want to relax here. So then we made the modification, we created the adjustment to lift the bum in the air, which allowed her body to relax and soften into that position. So this is where it is so incredibly important. If you want to provide a meaningful modification for your student, something that really has high value for them, that aligns with their intentions and their goals and their needs, that you need to consider, what do they even want through this? Because what you can do is just continue to provide things that you have no idea if it's actually even going to work for them, or if it's something that they want, if it's something that they need. So this actually takes so much of the guesswork out of it. However, it does require a conversation. It does require a collaboration with your student. And it's important to be able to make this time in some capacity, whether it's during a practice, if that's possible, before a practice, or after a practice, or maybe in a private lesson setting. But when you're able to collaborate with your student and you're able to ask them what it is that they want, what their intention is, it's so much more potent and powerful and transformational for them. Their yoga practice is optimized. The benefits of their practice really become optimized because you're offering them something that actually aligns with what it is that they need. Now, as I said, with this approach, it might not work depending on the class setting or how you are interacting with them. Now, you do need to sometimes go out of your way to be able to touch base with them. So again, you can do this before the class or after the class, and you can say to them, "Hey, I noticed that this pose seems to be just not really right for you. How are you feeling in this pose? And then they can share that with you. Now also, when people come to you and they ask you, hey, this doesn't feel right for me, and they take it up on themselves to ask you, you don't need to approach them, then the first thing that you can do is you can ask them. You can ask them a question and say, what is it that you would like from this pose? So you're constantly giving the power back to your student, because at the end of the day, you cannot know everything about them. And even if you know a lot about them, you still really will benefit from your ability to ask them questions and to understand where they're coming from. They will benefit from that, and you will feel much more confident, because you know what? You don't need to provide all the answers. It's a collaboration, it's a co-creation, and that is one of the most optimal ways to assist your students with modifications, variations, is to be able to ask them, well, what are you looking to achieve from this pose? And you know what? I have found that quite often our students are very disconnected from what it is that they actually need that they don't know. They're like, oh, well, I don't know. Aren't I supposed to be doing X, Y, Z? And then I'll say, well, that is one component of the pose, but what do you need? And so I'm going to go back to the balancing example that I gave in yesterday's video. Now, if you have a student and you give them a modification for a balancing pose, such as holding onto the wall, okay, to support them in that balance, if their primary focus and their intention was not to build up their balancing capacity, if their primary intention, let's say, was in something like a Warrior 3 to get that lengthened kind of T shape and to reach out the back leg and lower the body down and lengthen it out in the opposite direction of the back leg, and if that was the main focus, maybe it's I want to really activate and lengthen my hamstring of my standing leg at the same time. But I can't do that if I don't have a wall to hold. If that's their primary focus, and their primary focus and intention is not necessarily to get better at balancing, of course it makes sense. Just go to the wall. You can use that thing as much as you want to. You don't ever have to worry about falling over, because your primary focus and intention is not the balance, but it is the other components and the other aspects of that balancing pose. So this is where it's really important and really beneficial to consider your students' needs, their goals, their intentions, what it is that they would like to achieve when providing a truly, genuinely meaningful modification for them. And I have to tell you that when you do this, it feels so much more inclusive. It's so much more accessible. It's so much more empowering for your students, and you provide so much more value for them as well, which actually really helps you to feel more purposeful in your teaching and fulfilling that desire that you likely have to help people and to assist them and help them benefit from the practice of yoga. So there's one final thing that I'm going to share with you that really makes up the formula to meaningful modifications and providing that for your students. And that involves something that I like to refer to as the context. The context of what you're doing. Is the pose moving? Is it in stillness? Is it being held for a few breaths? Is it being held for a few minutes? The context really, really matters. We're going to look at that tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video.